and experts are warning of a high number of Palestinian children who are dying due to hunger and malnutrition. They say it indicates that the social structures there have been totally attacked and critically weakened. Let's talk about it now with the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health, Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, who's also on the panel of experts and the co-author of this report. Dr. Mofokeng, thank you very much for joining us and really appreciate your time. Talk to us about the human face first. We'll get to the politics and we'll get to the players in just a moment. But when we talk about famine and we talk about deaths already of children, starting to begin to rise and to escalate, share with us the profiles of some of these families, some of these children, and the context in which they are living right now.
Yeah, so the situation now in Gaza is still as dynamic and rapidly evolving as it has been post-October the 7th, in that we have more and more people displaced. We have more and more people who are without adequate nutritious food and meals to sustain them on an everyday basis. What we have seen, of course, and as it would be predictable, children would be some of the first people to show, right, malnutrition and dehydration. But you also have pregnant people who have higher requirements for nutrition and energy, for every day due to pregnancy status, and they too have been, critically impacted by a lack of nutritious food every day. We also know that newborns in Gaza, since the beginning of this current escalation, have also been experiencing malnutrition at birth. And because of a lack of sustained food supply, the mothers who are supposed to be nursing are unable to nurse because they just cannot produce enough breast milk to do so. And you also then have newborns who are dying of malnutrition and dehydration as well. This is now beyond the population in its entirety.
And some of the children we're talking about, because in cases like these, and especially where many people are affected, the individual stories can get lost in the numbers and in these statistics. We're talking about children like Fayez Ataya, 6 months old, dying on the 30th of May. 13-year-old Abdul Qadir Al-Seri, dying on the 1st of June at the Al-Aqsa Hospital. 9-year-old Ahmed Abu Raida, who died on the 3rd of June in a tent. This is where his displaced family was living. I want to go, Tlaleng, to the technical definition of a famine, so that it's important for us to understand, how famine is determined and a very specific set of circumstances that make it so.
Yeah, famine usually refers to as an extreme scarcity of food. And in the ways that we have, come to understand famine has always been in the context of a climate crisis, or an unforeseen circumstance where you have a government or a state that therefore then rapidly moves, right, to mitigate that. We know that before you can get to a famine, there are, of course, levels such as starvation, right? You get critical levels of acute malnutrition. And so part of the work of UN experts that we've been doing has been tracking to what level is food aid able to come into Gaza compared to before October 7th, being cognizant that even on October 6th, Gaza was already a humanitarian setting, right? We mustn't lose sight of that there was already extreme measures that humanitarian workers, UN agencies, and individuals still had to go through to still provide assistance to Gaza. But in this instance, you have conditions, therefore, of an illegal occupation by Israel, where they have imposed even stricter, to a point where they blocked entire access by road for these humanitarian support and food security programs to continue. So you went from starvation to acute malnutrition to now chronic malnutrition and absolute death and destitution.
And I think the important aspect and attribute of what you're saying, Tlaleng, is intentionality. This is something that you've reiterated before, and it's reiterated again with these cases and the declaration of a famine now spreading throughout the Gaza Strip, that, you know, what this talks to is what you describe as Israel's intentional and targeted starvation campaign against the Palestinian people. You also say it's a form of genocidal violence and has resulted in famine all across Gaza. Bearing in mind that we've heard, you know, we've kind of heard this in different forms before, it's becoming ever more real right now, a situation that you say also predates, well, you know, the context was being created pre-October the 7th. What's to happen now if nothing significantly has shifted to ensure that the, you know, supplies of food, of medicine, and of aid reach these communities? You know, we're writing the death warrants for so many more people in the days ahead.
There will definitely be widespread death in those particular areas in Gaza. We also need to put our minds to what's happening in the West Bank, where you have settlers aided by the Israeli military to continue to burn, you know, the agricultural lands. So even the expected production from, you know, that cultivation of food is now also threatened. And ultimately, this is another form of attack, another form of just genocidal acts on the part of Israel. And because a famine is classified, you know, when an area has lost, when at least 20% of the households are facing extreme lack of food, and 30% of the children are suffering from acute malnutrition, we need to remember as well that the population in Gaza, even if tomorrow you opened all of the land access, they are being shot at in their quest to access those trucks, in their quest to access support from humanitarian areas, including the UN's own agencies, which are unable to actually, complete their mandate on the ground. So this is going to take more than just quiet diplomacy behind the scenes. It's going to take economic, political, and also diplomatic leadership in ways that we are yet to see. I think for me, one of the hallmarks of this escalation has been a complete and catastrophic failure of diplomacy and so-called quiet leadership that happens behind the scenes. And so we ought to continue demanding for an immediate ceasefire and followed by an end to this illegal occupation, because it's that illegal occupation by its design, that apartheid in itself still is genocidal. So in order to come out of this acute moment, we have to create a situation where the Palestinians can have the space and the moment and the time to firstly recover from this and also start a process of self-determination. And that cannot happen in the context of ongoing war that's very asymmetrical, also in the context of an ongoing illegal occupation.
But Israel, their diplomatic mission in Geneva has said, what you're saying is misinformation. It's supporting Hamas propaganda. It has also said that it's scaled up its assistance in delivering humanitarian aid. How do you respond to that?
Look, I think if there's one thing that has already been demystified, is that not only do they claim to be the most sophisticated military, which they are not, and secondly, these kinds of attacks that they've done, that they continue to do, they themselves articulate them. Their own leadership articulated the intent to wipe out Gaza. They articulated the intent to not let this be done until they decide when it's done. And so it's a cop-out to call everyone else, calling them out, misinformation. Remember, the UN has decided that this is a decade of peace in the name of Nelson Mandela. And in their own documents, the UN member states said that they are going to look at the root causes of conflict around the world. And so it can't be that when we do that work intentionally of looking at root causes, it's then called misinformation. The ICJ found it plausible that Israel's act could amount to genocide. And at that time, had issued 6 provisional measures, right? And so where is the misinformation if you are even talking about ICJ findings, which went a step further to actually give them particular directives in terms of provisional measures. So for me, it's not to get into a public argument about misinformation or what they are saying, but to also bring to the public domain that my mandate has engaged with the Israel government even before October the 7th, begging and advocating for children, for people with chronic illnesses, specialized treatment needs, to be able to leave the strip to get the treatment they need elsewhere. This is not new to post-October the 7th. Gaza was already a humanitarian crisis before. What we see now is their intent and those people that support them diplomatically, like the United States and the European countries, to pacify a genocide. And that will not happen. We will not be pacified and accept that this current context is normal. Yeah. All people everywhere in the world, exploited and humiliated and brutalized and colonized, understand the visceral nature of what's going on there. And so we have to take this very seriously, not only as an attack on human rights, period, but also on accountability mechanisms within the multilateral system that Israel has again shown intent to not take into account at all.
Tlaleng, take us back into the room, Dr. Mofokeng, take us back into the room pre-October 7th, when, as you say, those pleas were made. You were involved in those discussions and talks to address the humanitarian situation. What were the responses then?
So the way that the methods of work, are given to me as an expert in the UN is that I'm able to communicate to any member states of the UN on potential, ongoing or historic human rights violations. And part of that has been using methods such as an urgent appeal, where you literally write under an urgent circumstances to the member states concerned to bring about to their attention particular issues. Sometimes you have a person who literally, connects with the UN through the different mechanisms to say, my rights are being violated. And sometimes we do what we call, other letters and other processes of engagement. I must say that the government of Israel has not been particularly forthcoming in terms of dialogue. They are not constructive in terms of even replying to those urgent appeals and the different methods of work that we do. And I think it's important because people think that it's now that there is impunity. Impunity has been there before in the ways that they can pick and choose which UN processes they want to participate in, which UN processes they deem for themselves are worthy of their attention and even replies and responses. But this already goes beyond my own mandate. There were other 3 special rapporteurs on the right to health before me who've also undertaken similar. We are unable to travel, for example, to Gaza to do an in situ or in assessment on the ground because of the different ways in which we need permissions from Israel. And if Israel decides they don't want to grant that permission, they don't grant that permission. So those are the realities on the ground that even UN experts are facing, and the UN itself is unable to lay out its mandate and complete it. Even the Secretary General is unable to ensure protection of our own colleagues. And so that's a very dire state of affairs.
Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, thank you very much for sharing the latest on your findings and what you have been able to declare now and what you're seeing. It is a terrible, terrible picture, and we know that around 500,000 people are in this hour facing the most severe and catastrophic level of food insecurity. It's one we will continue to watch very closely. Thank you for your time this morning. Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to health. Do stay with us.